This video documents a Twitter thread by user @Buriquagato on the 8th of December, 2020. I am not @Buriquagato, just someone interested in the topics he addresses. Among all the rain dance efficacy claims about masks and lockdown and demands to do something, one glaring fact remains about COVID-19, it is primarily a regional and seasonal virus pattern. It's tempting to see the US as 3 waves, but this does not really look to be the case. This graph shows us COVID deaths per million population, by week. For this and subsequent graphics, give the video a pause and take the opportunity to examine the details presented. What appears to be the case is that this is mostly just regions taking place at different times. I broke the US into climate regions and aggregated deaths by region using the CDC deaths data because it is best standardized and uses actual date of death. It lags some. Here is a map of the continental US broke down into climate regions. So we should treat the last couple weeks as incomplete. But the season pattern from these regions emerges clearly in the data. This is not 3 waves in all locations, it's waves in multiple surges in different places being aggregated into a graph that looks like none of them. I made one change to the ontology. Idaho is northern plains, not coastal northwest. As most population in Oregon and Washington is coastal, this seemed to make sense. Apart from that, I just used the US government's climate map. Several patterns emerge. One consistency was very high within regions. To the northeast was much worse. No other region had a state break 100 deaths per million people per week. 5 northeastern states did, with New York hitting 350. 3 The southern US had a markedly later seasonality. This fits with ideas like Hope Simpson and with what we saw Mexico, as well as Central and South America. We see this again here, but with one marked deviation in Louisiana. This appears to have been driven by Mardi Gras, which took place in February at peak infection and looks to have pulled some, but not all, of Louisiana into the northeastern biome. This leads to a further interesting sub-analysis. Louisiana did not get a double peak surge when you break it down to the parish level. The Mardi Gras counties went early, others in line with regional season. But each was distinct. That alone can't really tell us much, but the data by parish can. Louisiana counties are called parishes. Look at Orleans and Jefferson parishes. They were the big spike in April. Then look at July. They had no spike, or barely any deaths despite the season. That's HIT. Many regions looked very similar among them despite varying policies undertaken by states. This seems to bolster the idea that virus gonna virus and that seasonality is the primary driver of the disease curve, not policy. The northern plains and mountain west, for whatever reason, seem to have a later third seasonality. Many have tried to blame this on something they did, but the uniformity among them makes this claim look dubious. The interesting regions are the ones with outliers or compound surges. The Southwest is one such. Behavior was largely similar apart from Arizona. Arizona looks to have been pulled into the southern biome. It peaked like Texas. Given cross-traffic with Mexico, this seems easy to explain. New Mexico, on the other hand, did not. This also makes sense as the New Mexico and Mexico border has very little population along it, so there was no one to cross-pollinate. This seems reasonable and like a good, parsimonious explanation for the Arizona and New Mexico divergence. The upper Midwest showed an unusual two-peak saddle shape as a region, but this seems to fall apart on closer examination. It was really just Michigan peaking out of regional season. I don't have a good theory on why, yet. I would love to hear some ideas if people have them. The one place that does look to have genuinely had a saddle-shaped double peak at low levels was the Ohio Valley. There we see two peaks of roughly equal size. The reason for this compound season is not clear to me and warrants looking at. Perhaps this breaks down by county? Or perhaps it is some seasonal quirk of the region or regional activity like farming. Again, theories are welcome. I also found one interesting quirk, a mid-Atlantic region with strikingly low deaths. North Carolina and West Virginia have almost no peak and almost no pattern. Virginia and Kentucky aren't far off. This could be a lot of things, including just a coincidence. Perhaps it's a regional and climactic sweet spot. If someone has the data, it would be fascinating to break this down by county and see what it looks like. Obviously the CDC data lags, is subject to change, and is incomplete in recent weeks. Avoid drawing much in the way of conclusions from the last couple weeks. But that was not really the goal here. The goal was to see how much COVID was seasonal and / or regional. The answer seems to be, a lot, almost certainly the prime driver. This is why we need to be very careful with using any one incidence of some policy as proof of anything. Demand to know what happened to the neighbors. The problem with having 10,000 shamans doing 10,000 rain dances is that, inevitably, a few are going to get lucky and do one right before the rains comes. Consider TIS chart from at INMESC. 3 states, same region, same curves. It's clear masks failed in New Mexico and Colorado. But Utah is different. This is a great chart that ATS Norman 1776 put together, plotting policy stringency versus excess deaths. Correlation is not causality, but material causality without correlation is pretty much impossible. This makes it awfully hard to argue that it worked. And we see the same lack of variance all over. Croatia is open. No lockdowns, no curfews, no mask laws. Open. Life there is normal. People are trying to claim this is causing a COVID squeeze. It's not. They look just like every other country around them, most of whom are locked down, masked, etc. NPIs do nothing. Even in Switzerland, who, unlike their neighbors, is not locking down this time. Just as we saw everyone get the same curves as Sweden from March through May. This methodology is a little complex, so let me explain what I did. A few EU countries provide real day of death data. This lets us plot meaningful curves to show rate of disease change. What struck me is how similar all the curves were. Everyone got the same shape. Seasonality / regional issues seem to be the big driver here. Leaving them out of a model will leave you missing most of the story. This is how Peru and Argentina were mistaken for having had great responses. Then their season came. Now, they are world leaders in deaths per capita. Because someone will doubtless bring it up, no, the Pacific Rim was not magic. They are not so bizarrely good at NPI that it worked 100 or 1,000 times better than in other places that did the same. They had more prior resistance. No other explanation really holds water. Several months back, I posited that the low COVID deaths in the Pacific Rim could not possibly be from lockdowns or masks. The differential was simply too large, the policies across the region too varied, and the results too internally similar. It has to be pre-existing resistance. Calling out Australian policy as though it's some exemplar of success when they look just like many of their neighbours who did no such thing is a recipe for bad decision making. Be very careful around such claims. Public policy in 2020 has been dominated not by science but by superstition. It is time this stopped. Another wave of the same pointless panic and punishing policy is not what the doctor ordered. It's self-harm, not self-help. #demand better. Thanks for watching this through to the end. I recommend that you check out @Buriquagato on Twitter to follow up on this analysis as more data becomes available. I am sidelined. See you next time.